The air in Riverton was sharp with the scent of autumn leaves and distant chimney smoke. It was the kind of morning that reminded people of warm coffee and worn flannel, not of battles or memorials. But for Samuel Sam Thompson, this day meant something else entirely. Dressed in his olive drab Class A uniform, polished brass buttons gleaming faintly under the overcast sky, Sam made his way slowly down Main Street toward the newly renovated Riverton Veterans Memorial Hall. His once broad shoulders were now slightly hunched, his gait steady but marked with age. In his hand, tucked neatly beneath his arm, was a yellowed envelope, an official invitation from the mayor's office, signed and dated. He had read it over at least 20 times in the past month. Sam's fingers tightened on the envelope as he approached the building. It was the first time he'd attended a public ceremony in decades. Not because he didn't care. He did. But crowds overwhelmed him. And over the years, he had become less a figure of respect and more a figure of forgetfulness. Invitations stopped coming. Names stopped being remembered. But this time, they'd remembered. Or so he thought. As he stepped onto the granite steps, his polished boots clicked faintly against the stone. A pair of uniformed security guards flanked the entryway. Young, clean-shaven, with matching blue jackets and earpieces. "Morning, sir," one said. "May I see your invitation?" Sam nodded, slowly pulling the envelope from his coat. It had been folded and unfolded too many times. The paper was soft and worn, the ink beginning to fade at the corners. The guard took it, looked it over for 2 seconds, then frowned. "This is kind of old," the guard muttered, turning it toward his partner. "We've gone digital. Do you have a QR code or a guest pass from email?" Sam blinked, numbered just the letter. The second guard checked a tablet. "Name? Thompson. Samuel Thompson. Sergeant. 101st Airborne." A few taps. A pause. "I'm not seeing it here, sir. You're not on the digital list." Sam reached into his coat again, this time producing a weathered veteran ID card. The photo was decades old, the edges curled. "This might help." The guard took it, but barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "I'm sorry. We've got a strict protocol for this event. Dignitaries, verified invitees only. Maybe you can watch from the sidewalk." Sam stared at the building's polished glass doors. Inside, he could see men in suits, women in dresses, and a Marine color guard adjusting the flagpole in preparation. The American flag, crisp and proud, unfurled above them. He had dreamed about being here, not for the applause or speeches, but because the names of the men he'd served with, names etched into the newly installed memorial wall, were being read aloud for the first time in 50 years. He had come to speak those names himself, but none of that mattered now. The second guard gave a practiced smile. "Look, sir, maybe try the general admission area down the block. There's a screen set up for overflow viewers." Sam's lips parted slightly as if to protest, but he stopped. Arguing wouldn't change anything. He'd seen this kind of dismissal before, more and more over the years. He gave a faint nod, tucked the ID and the envelope back into his coat, and turned away. He crossed the street and sat heavily on a public bench. The chill of the stone crept into his bones, but he didn't flinch. He withdrew a small photo from his breast pocket. 7 young men in fatigues, laughing, arms slung around each other in the dirt outside a tent in Pleiku, 1969. He stared at it and waited, not for permission, but for someone to remember. From his spot across the street, Sam watched the steady stream of people, entering the Riverton Veterans Memorial Hall. The new facade glimmered with polished marble, bronze plaques, and banners that read, "Honoring Our Heroes, a Legacy Rededicated." Dignitaries in tailored suits shook hands. Younger veterans with neatly pressed dress blues posed for photographs. Families arrived in coordinated outfits, children holding little flags in hand. No one looked his way. Sam sat quietly, his hands folded over his cane. The cold from the stone bench seeped through the thick wool of his uniform pants, but he didn't move. His gaze remained fixed on the building that once promised remembrance, now guarded by protocol and digital guest lists. The photograph in his lap fluttered slightly in the wind. 7 young faces stared back at him, boys frozen in time. Private Charlie Ames with his gap-toothed grin. Medic Lynn with his crooked glasses. Dawson, Ray, Polk, Turner, all long gone. He traced each face with his finger, like a roll call whispered to the wind. He'd been the last one standing since 1972. Behind him, the city pulsed with normalcy. A teenager zoomed past on a scooter. A jogger gave a curious glance, but kept running. Some assumed he was just another old vet, wandering too close to a ceremony he didn't belong to. Some didn't see him at all. The speakers on the building's outer walls crackled to life. "Welcome, citizens of Riverton," came the voice of Mayor Douglas. "Today, we remember not only the battles fought overseas, but the courage carried home." Sam closed his eyes, leaning back slightly. He didn't come to hear speeches. He came to say their names. He pictured the last time he saw each of them. Charlie, cut down in a rice field trying to pull a civilian child to safety. Lynn, struck while trying to save Charlie. Turner died shielding Sam when the shrapnel came. He remembered every scream, every face, every final breath. A gust of wind blew a few leaves across the street. Sam tugged his coat tighter and glanced at the entrance again. A man in uniform stood at the podium now, giving a speech about valor and sacrifice. Sam couldn't hear the words over the distance and the noise of traffic, but the audience applauded at the end. Sam didn't clap. Instead, he pulled something else from inside his coat, a small journal, leather-bound, weathered by age. He opened to a marked page and began to read quietly under his breath. November 14th, 1969. We made it through another night. Polk says he heard movement outside the wire. Turner's got a bad feeling. We'll push out at dawn. I hope this isn't our last patrol. Not for Ray. Not for Lynn. I don't want to carry any more silence. He paused, staring at the ink, faded and cracked. Across the street, the band began playing God Bless America. Inside, people stood with hands on hearts. Out here, Sam sat alone, a living memorial no one noticed. Then, something shifted. A young girl, maybe 10, broke away from the crowd with her mother chasing behind. She stopped at the sidewalk in front of Sam and stared. "You a soldier?" she asked softly. Sam looked up, surprised. He nodded. "Were you in a real war?" she asked again. Sam hesitated, then replied, "The only kind there is." The mother caught up, apologizing, trying to pull the girl away. But the child looked back at Sam one more time and said, "Thank you." And that was all he needed. Not applause, not a stage, just someone to see him, to remember. Inside the brightly lit Memorial Hall, the atmosphere buzzed with dignified energy. Rows of cushioned seats filled quickly. Camera flashes popped like firecrackers as decorated veterans shook hands with city council members. On stage, a high school choir rehearsed quietly, their voices blending into the hum of anticipation. Flags hung from every corner, red, white, and blue waves draping the marble like a patriotic curtain. Colonel James Harris stood near the front row, sipping coffee from a compostable cup. At 58, his military build was still intact, tall, square-shouldered, and defined by the air of command that never left him, even in retirement. His silver star and bronze star glinted from his chest, polished to near perfection. He had been asked to give the keynote address, Legacy and Leadership, a Soldier's Debt. As a junior officer in Vietnam, Harris had survived chaos that still echoed in his dreams. And at the center of one of those dreams, no, memories, was a man named Samuel Thompson. Harris hadn't spoken to Sam in over 5 decades, but some faces never faded. The jawline under that helmet, the gravel in his voice, the way he dragged Harris through enemy lines with a bullet in his own thigh. Harris owed his life to that man. He scanned the crowd. The name wasn't on the printed guest list. That bothered him. He knew Sam had received an invitation. He'd recommended it himself through the mayor's office. Just then, his gaze caught something through the massive glass windows behind the stage. Across the street, a man on a bench, alone, the uniform, the posture, the boots, and in his lap, yes, even from this distance, the unmistakable square shape of a photo cradled with care. Harris's heart skipped. He turned sharply and approached the event coordinator, clipboard in hand. "Excuse me," Harris said firmly. "Do you have a Sergeant Samuel Thompson on your confirmed list?" The coordinator blinked. "Can't say I do, sir. Why?" "Because he's sitting across the street alone. That man saved my life in 1969. He should be in the front row." I'm not sure what happened," the coordinator stammered. "The digital system didn't have his RSVP." Harris narrowed his eyes. "Do you understand what this ceremony is about?" "Yes, sir. It's about honoring our veterans." "Then fix this," Harris snapped, already turning toward the doors. As the colonel stepped outside, the November wind met him like an old adversary. But it wasn't enough to slow him down. Each step toward Sam felt heavier, loaded with guilt and disbelief. Across the street, Sam sat as still as stone, unaware of the ripple he had caused. When Harris reached him, he didn't speak right away. Instead, he stopped 3 feet in front of the bench, straightened to full attention, and offered a perfect salute. Sam slowly looked up. Recognition dawned gradually. First confusion, then a glimmer of memory, and finally, the ghost of a smile. "You look like hell," Sam rasped. "And you haven't aged a day," Harris grinned. They both laughed. A brief, broken sound forged in nostalgia and disbelief. "I thought you weren't coming," Sam said. "I was going to speak today, but now I know why I'm really here." Sam tilted his head. "You remembered?" "I never forgot." Harris extended his hand. "Come with me, Sergeant. It's time they know who you are." Sam hesitated. "They turned me away." "Not anymore," Harris said, with a steel edge in his voice. "They're about to learn that heroes don't need QR codes." As the 2 men crossed the street, Harris walking slightly slower to match Sam's pace, the buzz inside the hall began to shift. Attendees noticed the pair. Phones rose. Conversations halted. The mayor turned mid-sentence, his eyes widening. And in that moment, the ceremony found its soul. Not in the speeches or the banners, but in the silent walk of 2 soldiers, one who had saved lives and the other who never forgot. The wide oak doors of Riverton Veterans Memorial Hall creaked open, and every conversation in the room stopped. All eyes turned toward the main entrance. Colonel James Harris stood tall and composed, but it was the man beside him who captured the room's attention. Sergeant Samuel Thompson, in his faded yet dignified uniform, walked with a measured grace that silence seemed to follow. His boots, shined with care that morning, tapped gently against the marble floor, echoing louder than applause. The shift in the room was instant. What had once been a polite gathering of guests now held the weight of collective realization. Some recognized the name from the program inserts. Samuel Thompson, Vietnam veteran, honored guest. Others saw only the lines of age on his face and the distant fire in his eyes, but instinctively understood that this was a man who had endured more than most could imagine. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Is that the guy they turned away?" "That's Sergeant Thompson, the one the colonel mentioned. I heard he saved 6 guys in a jungle under fire." The mayor, halfway through a planned speech about the legacy of service, fumbled his notes and hurried from the stage. His polished shoes clicked awkwardly as he met the 2 men in the center aisle. "Sergeant Thompson," he began, breathless. "I deeply regret the mistake made earlier. Please, allow me to extend my personal and public apology." Sam looked him in the eye. "It's not about me," he said calmly. "It never was." The mayor nodded, humbled. He turned and waved to the MC at the podium. "Stop the program. We're rewriting the schedule." Colonel Harris took the mic. "This is the man who should have opened today's ceremony," he said, his voice projecting effortlessly. "A man who wore the uniform with distinction. A man who risked his life for others without hesitation and never once asked for recognition." He paused, scanning the audience. "In 1969, I was wounded on a mission near the Cambodian border. We were surrounded. The jungle was lit with fire and noise. My radio was gone. My legs were useless. I was done for." He looked to Sam. "But Sergeant Thompson carried me. 6 miles. Under fire. Through terrain that would have broken most men. I was 23. He was 32. He had already seen too much war, and still he didn't stop. Because he believed every life he could save was worth saving." A hush fell over the crowd. "He didn't just save me. He saved my future family. He saved my grandchildren, who now exist because of him. And today we almost left him sitting on a bench." A woman in the audience stood, then another. Soon the entire room rose to their feet in a solemn ovation. Sam stood in the aisle, uncertain of what to do with so much attention. He gave a small, slow nod in appreciation, then turned to Harris and whispered, "I'm not good at speeches." "You don't need one," Harris replied. "Just come up there. Let them see you." Together, they stepped onto the stage. Sam stood behind the podium, gripping the sides as though steadying himself against the past. "I didn't come here for me," he began softly. The microphone barely caught his voice, but the room was so silent it didn't matter. "I came here to speak names. Names you don't know, but I do." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, yellowed with time and sweat. "Private Charlie Ames, Corporal William Dawson, Medic Jacob Lynn, Sergeant Mike Turner, Lieutenant Brian Polk, Specialist Jordan Ray." He looked up. "They were my brothers. They were boys. They never got home. I carry them every day." His voice trembled, not with weakness, but with reverence. "So, if this building is to honor veterans, let it start with them." A tear rolled down the cheek of a younger soldier in the front row. The audience didn't clap. They stood in silence, some saluting, others bowing their heads, not because a program told them to, but because something older, something sacred, had just filled the room. Sam stepped back, handed the paper to Colonel Harris, and whispered, "Now they've been heard." The ceremony continued, but nothing that followed could quite recapture the gravity of Sergeant Samuel Thompson's brief, heartfelt tribute. Not the mayor's impromptu speech, not the brass band's carefully rehearsed medley of patriotic songs. Because what Sam had offered wasn't ceremony, it was memory, raw, unpolished, and true. After the event, people lined up, not for food, not for selfies, but for the chance to shake his hand. Some wept, a few saluted, many simply touched his shoulder in silent gratitude. A teenage girl approached with her grandfather, a Korean War vet who could no longer speak after a stroke. She pressed a letter into Sam's palm and whispered, "Thank you for carrying the memories of men like my grandpa." He couldn't answer. His voice was gone, but his eyes glistened with understanding. Sam nodded, quietly pocketing the letter, his heart heavy yet fuller than it had been in years. Outside, the autumn sky had shifted. The sun dipped lower now, casting long golden shadows across the Veterans Memorial Hall. The crowd began to thin, and the staff resumed packing away folding chairs and banners. But Sam remained. He stepped out and slowly walked toward the newly installed bronze plaque on the front wall. There, engraved in simple, bold letters, were the names he had read aloud, his fallen brothers, etched into permanence at last. Colonel Harris joined him moments later, carrying 2 cups of steaming coffee. "Figured you'd still be here?" he said, offering 1 cup. Sam took it with a nod. "You know, for a long time I thought I was the last one left." "You were never alone," Harris replied. "You just carried the silence for the rest of us." They sat together on the bench just beside the plaque, one of the last remaining pieces from the old building. It had been restored and now bore a new inscription, reserved for Sergeant Samuel Thompson and the brothers who never came home. For a while, the 2 men said nothing. The wind rustled through the nearby oak trees, and the American flag above them rippled gently in the breeze. Sam took a slow sip of coffee. "I never talked about it, you know. Not even to my wife. She asked, but I'd always just change the subject." "I get it," Harris said. "Sometimes silence feels safer." Sam chuckled softly. "Yeah, but after today, I think maybe it's time to stop being quiet." A young boy, maybe 10, approached hesitantly. He wore a scout uniform and held a small notebook. "Sir," he asked, voice shaking, "can I ask you something?" Sam turned toward him. "Of course, son. My class is doing a report on veterans. Can I write about you?" Sam considered the boy's earnest eyes. He didn't see a reporter or a politician, just someone who wanted to remember. "You can," he said, "but make sure you write about the others too. The 6 men on that wall. They're the story." The boy nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir." As he walked away, Sam let out a long, quiet breath. Later that evening, after most had gone, the staff noticed him standing alone beneath the flagpole in front of the hall. He stood at attention, back straight, eyes forward. Then, slowly, he raised his right hand to his brow and gave one final salute. Measured, crisp, eternal. That image, the last salute, was captured by a photographer who had lingered behind, and it would soon circle the nation. Newspapers and news sites ran it with headlines like, "The Last Salute, One Man Stand for the Forgotten." But Sam never saw himself as a headline. He only saw himself as a keeper of names, a vessel for memory, and a silent bridge between the past and the present. The next morning, Sam returned home, folded his uniform with care, and placed the new Distinguished Service Cross in a wooden box with his late wife's photo. Then, as always, he rose early, put on his jacket, and walked to the hall. Not to be honored, but to remember. And every Sunday after that, rain or shine, he sat on the bench beneath the plaque, hands folded in his lap, eyes turned toward the names on the wall, not guarding the past,